I'll never forget the day it all began. We were so happy, Michael and I, getting the nursery ready. The walls painted a soft blue, the crib carefully assembled, the toys neatly lined up on the shelf. Everything was perfect. I was filming little home videos, laughing as Michael tried to put together a mobile and ended up with all the pieces mixed up. "You're going to be the best dad," I said, and he smiled, a little awkwardly. The birth happened at home. We didn't have time to make it to the hospital. I remember the contractions, the pain, the sweat dripping down my face, and then the cry, a strong, healthy cry. I looked at Michael and he was crying too, relieved. "It's a boy," he whispered, cradling the imaginary baby in his arms. Yes, imaginary, because when I looked at the crib there was nothing there, just emptiness. But I swore I could see him. My baby, my little Ethan. I saw him lying in the crib, his tiny eyes closed, his little mouth moving as if he were dreaming. Michael seemed to see him too, at least at first. He would rock the crib, sing lullabies, change diapers that were never dirty. But sometimes I'd catch the doubt in his eyes, a doubt he didn't dare voice. Until that day. He reached out to touch the baby and his face changed. "Emily," he began, his voice trembling. "There's nothing here." I looked at him, then at the crib. Ethan was there. I knew he was, but when I tried to touch him, my hand went right through as if he were made of smoke. In the days that followed, the house felt alive. Small, almost imperceptible things started happening. A rattle would fall off the shelf on its own. The mobile would spin without any wind. At night, I swore I heard little giggles coming from the nursery, but when I went in, Ethan was sleeping, still in the empty crib. Michael tried to rationalize it. "It must be the wind," he'd say. Or, "Maybe the house is settling." But I could see the fear in his eyes. He heard it too. He felt it too. One night I woke up to the sound of the crib rocking. It was a gentle, rhythmic motion like someone was soothing the baby. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. "Michael?" I whispered, but he was sound asleep beside me. I got up and went to the nursery. The crib was still rocking, but no one was there. Just emptiness. Just silence. The next day, our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, came over with a cake. She was a kind woman, always looking out for others. "I heard the baby crying last night," she said, smiling. "He must be growing." So fast, I froze. Michael looked at me and I could see the panic in his eyes. "You heard that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Mrs. Thompson frowned. "Of course I did. A loud cry coming from right in here." She pointed to the nursery. "Can I see the little one?" I didn't know what to say. Michael tried to stop her, but she was already walking toward the nursery. I followed, my heart beating so hard I thought I might pass out. She stopped at the door looking at the crib. Her smile faded. "Where's the baby?" she asked, confused. "He's sleeping," I said, my voice shaky. Mrs. Thompson looked at me, then at the empty crib. "Emily," she started but didn't finish. Instead, she backed away as if she'd seen something she shouldn't have. I need to go," she said, and hurried out, leaving the cake forgotten on the table. Michael and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with fear and frustration. "Emily, this isn't normal. We need to talk about this." But I didn't want to talk, because deep down I knew Ethan was there. And if he wasn't, then what the hell was I taking care of? The tension between Michael and me grew every day. He tried to be understanding, but I could see the doubt in his eyes, that silent fear that I was losing my mind. And maybe I was. But how could I explain the sounds? The movements? Mrs. Thompson had heard the crying. Someone else had to believe me. One night, after another day of heavy silence, Michael finally snapped. "Emily, this can't go on. There's no baby. You need to see a doctor, a therapist, someone." I looked at him, feeling the tears burn my eyes. "You think I don't know this is weird? You think I'm not scared? But he's here, Michael. I feel him. I see him." He shook his head, frustrated. He's not, Emily. There's nothing there. It's just in your head. That's when I couldn't take it anymore. The words came out before I could stop them. I lost a baby before you, Michael. A baby I never told anyone about. He stopped, looking at me like I'd hit him. What? I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that confession. It was years ago before we met. I was pregnant, but I lost the baby. I never got over it. And now, with Ethan, I feel like it's a second chance. I can't just let this go. Michael was silent for a moment, then he sat down beside me, holding my hand. Emily, I didn't know, but that doesn't mean you can keep living in this illusion. It's not healthy. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But then, that night, things got worse. I woke up to a voice, a small voice, whispering in my ear, "Mommy, protect me." My heart stopped. I sat up in bed, looking around. Michael was asleep beside me, still. The voice came again, clearer now. "Mommy, I'm scared." I got out of bed, shaking, and went to Ethan's nursery. The crib was rocking, but no one was there. Just a shadow, small and faint, in the corner of the room. I approached, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Ethan?" I whispered. The shadow moved, and for a moment I swore I saw two little eyes glowing in the dark. Then it was gone. When I went back to the bedroom, Michael was awake, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Pure fear. "Emily," he said, his voice trembling. "What's happening to us?" I didn't have an answer, because deep down I knew it wasn't just in my head. Something was in that house. Something that wasn't human. The house was silent, but the tension in the air was palpable. Michael and I sat in the living room, staring at each other without a word. The security camera he'd installed in Ethan's nursery blinked a red light, like an eye watching us. I knew what he was thinking. We needed proof. Proof that we weren't crazy. Proof that something real was happening. "If we record something, anything, we can take it to someone," Michael said, breaking the silence. "A priest, a medium, I don't know, but we need to know what this is." I agreed, but deep down I was scared. Scared of what we might find. Scared that maybe there was nothing to find. When night fell, we got ready. The camera was on, pointed directly at the crib. We sat in the hallway just outside the nursery with only a dim flashlight lighting our faces. Time dragged on, every minute feeling like an eternity. I could hear every beat of my heart, every shaky breath from Michael. And then it started. First came the sound. A faint cry, almost imperceptible, coming from the nursery. I looked at Michael and he was so pale he looked like a ghost. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the slightly open door. The cry grew louder, more anguished. And then the crib started to rock. Slowly at first, but soon with force, as if someone were pushing it in anger. "Let's go," Michael said, standing up. He grabbed the flashlight and headed to the nursery with me right behind him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. When we entered, the crib was still rocking, but no one was there. Michael's flashlight lit up every corner of the room, but there was nothing. Just emptiness. Just silence. And then, the voice came. "Mommy?" It was coming from behind us. I turned, and there it was. A small, shadowy figure standing in the hallway. I couldn't see its face, just a faint silhouette, but I knew it was him. Ethan. "Emily, no!" Michael shouted, but I was already moving, reaching out to the figure. "Ethan?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure moved, too fast to follow, and suddenly it was right beside me. I felt an intense cold, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. And then, the voice came again, but this time, it wasn't the voice of a child. It was deeper, darker. "You abandoned me." I stumbled back, tripping over Michael. He caught me, but I could feel him shaking too. "This isn't real," he whispered. But I knew he didn't believe his own words. The figure moved again, this time toward the crib. The rocking stopped abruptly, and then the crib started moving on its own, sliding across the floor toward us. Michael screamed and tried to push it back, but it was like an invisible force was holding us in place. "Emily, we need to get out of here," he yelled, pulling my arm. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at the figure now hovering, above the crib floating in the air. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of Ethan's nursery. The dawn light filtered through the curtains, illuminating the still crib in the center of the room. Michael was gone. I sat up, feeling a throbbing pain in my head, and looked around. The house was eerily quiet. "Michael?" I called, my voice echoing off the empty walls. No answer. I stood up, still shaking, and went to the living room. Nothing. The kitchen. Nothing. The master bedroom. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished. I ran back to Ethan's nursery, where the security camera still blinked its red light. Maybe it had captured something. Maybe I could figure out what had happened. When I turned on the monitor, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the remote. The footage appeared, showing the previous night. I saw Michael and me entering the nursery, the crib rocking, the shadowy figure. And then the screen went static for a moment before showing something that made me freeze. I was lying on the floor motionless while Michael was pulled out of the room by an invisible force. He was struggling, screaming, but there was no sound. And then he just disappeared, as if he'd been erased from existence. The camera kept recording, showing the crib rocking on its own until the screen went black. I looked at the crib, and for the first time, I didn't see Ethan. I didn't feel his presence. Just emptiness. Just silence. And then, I heard it. A faint cry, coming from somewhere far away. "Mommy." I knew it wasn't Ethan. It was something else. Something I'd brought into our home. Something that was now alone with me. The security footage was found weeks later. No one knows for sure who turned it over to the police, but it quickly went public. Detectives combed the house, but they found no sign of Michael or me. Just the crib, still rocking slightly, as if someone had just finished soothing a baby. I've never been a fan of dolls. Those glassy eyes and frozen smiles always creeped me out. But when my grandmother handed me that antique doll, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. "She'll look after your child when you can't," she said with a stern look that didn't allow for questions. The doll was strange, with a faded dress and a face that seemed to follow you around the room. I stored it in the closet of the nursery, trying to ignore the unease it gave me. That night, as I was putting my son Lucas to sleep, I felt something off. The doll was sitting in the rocking chair where I was sure I hadn't left it. My heart raced, but I tried to rationalize it. It must have been the wind, I thought, even though I knew the windows were closed. I put the doll back in the closet and went to bed, trying to shake the chill running down my spine. But the next day it was back in the chair, and this time, Lucas was staring at it, babbling something that sounded like, "Mama." In the days that followed, the doll kept moving. I'd find it in different places, in Lucas's crib, in the rocking chair, even in the kitchen. Each time, Lucas seemed more enchanted by it, as if the doll were his favorite caretaker. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that the exhaustion of being a single mom was getting to me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One night I woke up to the sound of whispers. They were faint, almost imperceptible, coming from Lucas's room. My heart pounded and I got up, trying not to make noise. When I entered the room, the doll was sitting in the crib, gently rocking, as if soothing Lucas. He was fast asleep, a smile on his face. I froze, feeling a cold wave rush through me. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The doll stopped rocking, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then slowly, the doll's head turned toward me, its glass eyes gleaming in the dark. I stumbled back, tripping over the doorway. When I looked again, the doll was back in the closet, as if nothing had happened. The next day, Lucas started babbling, words I'd never taught him. "Mama," he'd say, pointing at the doll. "Mama." I didn't know what to do anymore. The doll was taking care of my son, but at what cost? Lucas started to change. He'd always been a calm baby, but now he had frequent nightmares. He'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, pointing at the dark corner of the room where the doll usually sat. "Mama," he'd cry, but he wasn't calling for me. He was calling for her. The doll. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that he was scared of something he didn't understand. But things only got worse. The doll moved more frequently, and I started hearing whispers during the day, not just at night. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but always there, like a constant buzz in my mind. One afternoon, while Lucas was napping, I decided to investigate the doll further. I picked it up carefully, feeling its strange weight in my hands. The faded dress smelled old, like mildew and something else, something I couldn't place. I turned the doll upside down and saw something carved into the wood. A name. Isabella. Remembered a story my grandmother had told me about a distant cousin who'd lost a daughter many decades ago. The girl's name was Isabella. Could the doll have something to do with that? That night I dreamed of the doll. It was in Lucas's crib, but this time, its glass eyes glowed with their own light. "He's mine now," it whispered, and I woke, up in a cold sweat. The next day I found the doll sitting in my favorite chair as if waiting for me. Lucas was on the floor, playing with it, but something was wrong. He wasn't smiling. He looked scared. "Lucas?" I called, but he didn't respond. He just kept babbling, "Mama." I knew I had to do something. The doll was taking over my son and I was losing control. But what could I do? How do you fight something you don't understand? I couldn't ignore it anymore. The doll was controlling Lucas, and I needed to act before it was too late. I decided to install a security camera in his room, hoping to catch something that would help me understand. Or maybe, just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. That night I put Lucas to bed and sat in the hallway, facing the camera monitor. The hours dragged on and I was nearly asleep when I heard it. A faint cry coming from the room. I looked at the monitor and saw the doll moving. It was in the crib, rocking Lucas with an eerie gentleness. My heart raced, and I got up, determined to end this once and for all. I entered the room and the doll stopped rocking. Lucas was fast asleep, but the doll was now sitting in the rocking chair, staring right at me. Its glass eyes gleamed in the dark, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You can't have him," I said, my voice shaking. "He's my son." The doll laughed, a low, raspy sound that echoed through the room. "He's mine now," it whispered. And suddenly I was thrown against the wall by an invisible force. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. The doll rose from the chair and floated toward me, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You can't stop me," it said, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the nursery floor. The security camera was still recording, and I saw the doll hovering over Lucas's crib, whispering phrases I couldn't understand. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. The last thing I saw before passing out was the doll turning to me with a smile that wasn't a doll's smile, but something much older and more sinister. When I came to, the house was silent. It took me a moment to orient myself, but then I remembered. The doll. Lucas. I ran to the nursery, but it was empty. The crib was untouched, but Lucas was gone. The doll had disappeared too. The security camera was still on, and I quickly pulled up the footage. The video showed the doll hovering over the crib, whispering phrases in a language I didn't understand. Suddenly, an invisible force pulled Lucas out of the crib, and he vanished into thin air. The doll then turned to the camera, its eyes glowing, with a malevolent light before disappearing as well. I looked around, desperate, but the house was empty. Lucas was gone, and so was the doll. I tried to scream, to call for help, but my voice was gone. The last thing I saw was the doll reappearing in the crib intact, gently rocking as if nothing had happened. And then, everything went black. The security footage was found weeks later. No one knows who turned it over to the police, but it quickly went public. Detectives combed the house, but they found no sign of me or Lucas. Just the crib, still rocking slightly as if someone had just finished soothing a baby. The case was filed as an unexplained disappearance. People whispered about us, theorizing about what could have happened. Some said we ran away, others that we were victims of a crime. But no one mentioned the doll. No one, except Mrs. Thompson. She was the last person to see us. In an interview, she said, "I heard the baby crying, I swear I did. But when I looked in the crib, there was nothing there, just a shadow." The house was abandoned after that. No one wanted to buy it, not even to tear it down. They say that sometimes you can still hear a cry coming from inside, and on full moon nights the crib rocks on its own. As for me, I don't know where I am. All I know is that I'm not alone. Something is here with me, something that calls for me, something that was never my child. I never imagined something so simple could go so wrong. When Peter and I decided to join the Perfect Parenting Challenge, it seemed like just another internet trend, a viral challenge that promised foolproof techniques for raising kids. As influencers, we were always looking for fresh content, and this seemed perfect. The first instructions were simple: sing a specific song at midnight and avoid eye contact with the baby at certain times. That night, while Peter held the camera, I sang the song to Lucas, our 6-month-old baby. He was sound asleep and everything seemed normal. But when I finished, I heard something. A faint whisper coming from his room. "Peter, did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. He shook his head, laughing. "It's probably the wind, Carla." But I knew it wasn't the wind. The windows were closed. I went to Lucas's room and he was sleeping peacefully. Only the crib was rocking slightly as if someone had just finished soothing him. In the days that followed, things started getting weird. Lucas, who had always been a calm baby, began having nightmares. He'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, pointing at the dark corner of the room. "Mama," he'd cry, but he wasn't calling for me. He was calling for something else. Peter tried to calm me down, saying it was just a phase, but I couldn't ignore the signs. Objects started moving on their own. One day I found Lucas's rattle on the kitchen floor, far from where it should have been. Another day I heard faint giggles coming from his room, but when I went in, Lucas was asleep. Our followers started sending strange messages. "Don't stop now," they said. "You're almost there." I tried to rationalize it, but the fear was always there, lingering in the back of my mind. One night, after putting Lucas to bed, I went to the bathroom to wash my face. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a message written in the steam. "Don't stop now." My heart raced and I ran to the room where Peter was editing the challenge video. "Peter, did you see this?" I asked, pointing at the mirror. He looked at me, confused. "What?" The mirror was clean, nothing written, but I knew what I'd seen. Something was wrong, and we were in the middle of it. Lucas's nightmares got worse. He didn't just wake up screaming. Now he was babbling words he'd never heard before. "Mama," he'd say, pointing at the dark corner of the room. "Mama." Peter and I tried to convince ourselves it was just a phase, but the supernatural occurrences intensified. Objects moved on their own more frequently, and the whispers I heard at night now happened during the day too. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but always there, like a constant buzz in my mind. One afternoon while Lucas was napping, I decided to dig deeper. I grabbed my phone and started researching the challenge. I found obscure forums filled with stories from other parents who had participated and disappeared. There were mentions of an ancient ritual, an entity that took over the baby in exchange for perfect parenting. My heart raced, and I showed Peter. "We need to stop this," I said, my voice shaking. He looked at me, scared. "But what if it's true?" What if we stop and something happens to Lucas? That night I dreamed of the entity. It was in Lucas's crib, but this time, its eyes glowed with their own light. "He's mine now," it whispered, and I woke up in a cold sweat. The next day, we found an old video explaining the ritual. It was exactly what we were doing. The challenge was a trap, and now we were stuck in it. Peter and I knew we had to do something. We couldn't keep going with the challenge, but we couldn't just stop either. We decided to confront the entity. We set up a security camera in Lucas's room and spent the night on watch. The hours dragged on, and I was nearly asleep when I heard it. A faint cry coming from the room. I looked at the monitor and saw the entity. It was in the crib, rocking Lucas with an eerie gentleness. My heart raced and I got up, determined to end this once and for all. We entered the room, and the entity stopped rocking. Lucas was fast asleep, but the entity was now sitting in the rocking chair, staring right at us. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You can't have him," I said, my voice trembling. "He's our son." The entity laughed, a low, raspy sound that echoed through the room. "He's mine now," it whispered, and suddenly, we were thrown against the wall by an invisible force. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. The entity rose from the chair and floated toward us, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You can't stop me," it said. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the nursery floor. The security camera was still recording, and I saw the entity hovering over Lucas's crib, whispering phrases I couldn't understand. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. The last thing I saw before passing out was the entity turning to me, with a smile that wasn't human but something much older and more sinister. When I came to, the house was silent. It took me a moment to orient myself, but then I remembered. The entity. Lucas. I ran to the nursery, but it was empty. The crib was untouched, but Lucas was gone. The entity had disappeared too. The security camera was still on, and I quickly pulled up the footage. The video showed the entity hovering over the crib, whispering phrases in a language I didn't understand. Suddenly, an invisible force pulled Lucas out of the crib, and he vanished into thin air. The entity then turned to the camera, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light before disappearing as well. I looked around, desperate, but the house was empty. Lucas was gone, and so was the entity. I tried to scream, to call for help, but my voice was gone. The last thing I saw was the entity reappearing in the crib, intact, gently rocking as if nothing had happened. And then, everything went black. The security footage was found weeks later. No one knows who turned it over to the police, but it quickly went public. Detectives combed the house, but they found no sign of us or Lucas. Just the crib, still rocking slightly, as if someone had just finished soothing a baby. The case was filed as an unexplained disappearance. People whispered about us, theorizing about what could have happened. Some said we ran away, others that we were victims of a crime. But no one mentioned the entity. No one except our followers. They knew. They always knew. The house was abandoned after that. No one wanted to buy it, not even to tear it down. They say that sometimes you can still hear a cry coming from inside, and on full moon nights, the crib rocks on its own. As for me, I don't know where I am. All I know is that I'm not alone. Something is here with me. Something that calls for me. Something that was never my child.